Laura Ingraham, and welcome to the first ever Ingraham Angle Town Hall. Now, first, we'd like to thank the City of Chicago and our audience here for hosting us for an incredibly important discussion. Chicago is one of the truly great American cities, spectacularly beautiful in the summer and winter. But in recent years, its gang violence problem has reached epidemic proportions, a level of violence it's just unacceptable for anywhere in America. The city is on pace for more than 2,000 shootings this year, which will mark the 5th straight year it's topped that grim mark. And just so you get some perspective, since 2011, the year that Rahm Emanuel took office as mayor, there have been over 4,000 murders in this city. That's more than the 3,481 soldiers who were killed in action in Operation Iraqi Freedom from 2003 to 2010, if you can believe it. And it's not just the level of violence in the city that's the problem. It's the lack of justice. According to an analysis conducted by the Washington Post, Chicago police have made an arrest in only about 27% of homicides since 2010. That's the lowest rate of any city the Post examined. For non-fatal shootings, it's even worse. The University of Chicago Crime Lab tells us just 10% of shootings resulted in an arrest in 2014. And by 2016, the latest year available, that number had dropped to just 5%. The unsolved crimes undoubtedly fuel a vicious cycle of distrust between law enforcement and community. And no one is immune from this violence. Throughout the hour, we're going to talk to members of law enforcement, community activists, religious and political leaders, as well as members of the audience, to try to figure out why this tragedy is unfolding in Chicago and how to stop it. Now, let's get started tonight with Anthony Napolitano. He's a former police officer and the sole Republican in Chicago's 50-seat city council. Martin Priebe, who is a member of Chicago's Fraternal Order of Police, and Kevin Graham, president of the Fraternal Order of Police, Chicago Lodge 7. Anthony, let's start with you. This is so both heartbreaking and infuriating. We have a world of violence across the globe. Heartbreaking stories every day. But as Americans, I can't imagine we find this level of violence in a city as spectacular as Chicago, with its rich history, acceptable. What do we do?
The biggest problem, I think, right now in the city of Chicago is they're not breaking it down into 3 different groups of what's plaguing our city. You got an incredible amount of narcotics that come through the city of Chicago. You got an enormous amount of guns on the street that just last year alone, or I'm sorry, in 2018 alone, almost 5,200 guns have been recovered. We have a sale of stolen merchandise, part of a criminal element on the street that is just, it's a multi-million-dollar industry. So you don't just have gangbangers going around shooting each other. This is a fight over territory. This is a fight over who's making money on the street right now. And if you can't get to the street and say, hey, you got to stop the narcotics that are coming in the boatloads, and we have to get more of these guns off the streets, then we have to realize that the criminal element is using the streets to sell stolen merchandise. We're never going to get ahead of this problem. I mean, your number was actually wrong. We're over the 2,000 mark of people shot in the city of Chicago already, and we have 375 homicides. So we've surpassed the number of people shot. I always say, can imagine how many have been missed.
Kevin, the police have had their hands full, that's for sure, with the level of violence. But you see the number of murders solved, suspects arrested, and it's a pretty small percentage compared to other cities, as you saw in that analysis. Why? Well,
there's a couple of reasons. The first reason is, first of all, we have had 2,025 shootings in the city up to date, as of today. First of all, it didn't start yesterday. It started several years ago when they decided to underfund and underman the police department. We are still almost 1,000 policemen short of where we need to be.
Wait, hold on. Everyone's got to understand. You're 1,000 police officers short in the city of Chicago today?
We only have half of the detectives that we need. We used to have 2,000 detectives.
How many do you have now?
Just about 1,000.
What's the reason for that? I mean, what does the politicians say?
You're going to have to ask the Mayor Rahm Emanuel for that answer. You know, he's the one that closed 3 police stations. He's the one that closed 2 detective areas. We didn't do that. We have always, at the FOP, tried to interject our solutions to the problem. But when it requires money, we're shut out. Our opinion doesn't count. That's part of the problem. And that was what has to change. We certainly want to go out there and do the job that we were hired to do. But because they have decided to have more police oversight, they've accepted the ACLU and their long stop carts because they have decided that we're going to work 12-hour days. We're not going to allow people time off. That all wears on police officers, and that is what has contributed to the problems in this city.
Let's now go to Melanie Brown, who prefers not to reveal her political party. Melanie, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. All right, so we know that all police aren't bad, you know, but when some of the police officers hurt our community, then we feel like some of the other police officers should come together and try to help the community because they should care about what the community thinks about the police department. So I just wonder, whatever happened to the good cop, bad cop? You know, where there's one group of police officers we might be afraid of, but then there's the good cop where they can share, you know, who did the murder, what's the crime, or anything like that. And we can get more, you know, crime solved for our community and to help everyone.
Going back to the issue of trust.
Yes.
Trust between the community and law enforcement. Law enforcement is supposed to keep people safe. When you call the police, you want to have that level of trust, and the police want you to trust them. Otherwise, they're not able to do their job either. Martin.
As a writer in the group, I would answer that by pointing to one statistic. The city of Chicago has paid over $700 million in police misconduct cases. And many of these cases, these claims against the police are bogus. And they're used to push this narrative of police corruption that is quite often fraudulent. And the city pays out on these and creates this industry of suing police officers that in turn lends itself to more police oversight. And even good police officers, and I believe the overwhelming majority of them are good. I think when officers do something wrong, it's generally a mistake. But all officers now in Chicago face an absolutely ludicrous level of oversight and potential lawsuits and criminal charges by a prosecutor that is clearly anti-police. And so this is one of the reasons that the police are unable to do the kind of effective police work that they want to do. Policing is an art. And the city is now set up in so many levels.
Give us some examples. So let's say when you brandish your firearm for any particular reason. Do you have to write a report on every time you brandish a firearm?
Not yet, but that's what they're trying to.
That's what Rahm Emanuel wants you to do.
Let me go back to one of our officers. They were trying to find that he had done something wrong. It was the FOP that dug our heels in and found out that what was going on at IPRA was they were trying to hold secret investigations and not divulge the outcome of those to the officer, which cleared him. They wanted to make sure that officers were found guilty. That's unacceptable. I don't care if it's a citizen that there's a secret investigation going on or it's a police officer. People need to be treated fairly, and unfortunately, police officers are not treated fairly.
So you think it's the accusation against a police officer, they're presumed guilty by the community. So there's a distrust between the community and police. Police don't trust the accusation.
No.
Or no?
No. It is the investigative body. All cases that involve shootings are sent to the FBI and to the state's attorney's office for prosecution.
Look, I think what we're getting at, and it's painfully obvious, when you have 1,000 detective deficit on a police force, could be a lot of things. Is it money not allocated? Is it the pay is not enough? Is it demoralized police? Is it too dangerous and people feel like for the risk I'm taking, I'm not getting much of a benefit? You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Why am I going to do this job? I mean, policing should be, is a noble profession. But Anthony, you hear two police officers, and they feel like Oftentimes they feel like they can do no right, but we have concerned citizens who say we need more of a collaboration here. Well, got to be able to fix this.
I'd love to answer that question. I was a police officer myself. I worked the street. I worked in the 15th district in Austin. I was a gang enforcement officer. So to answer this young lady's question, I've done that job. I built relationships on the street with other officers, and there was the ability to work crime based off relationships you have. But what's happened is a culture through America now is the police are becoming the enemy. The neighborhoods are kind of closing their doors and don't want to answer the police.
Don't be a snitch.
Don't be a snitch, because snitches get stitches, and that's a concept on the street.
I've seen that T-shirt.
Yeah, and you know what? There's always this concept that there's this thin blue line between officers and they don't talk, the code of silence. That's not even true. The thin blue line is a certain amount of officers that will take a bullet for each other and protect each other. The bigger line that's harder to cross is in the neighborhoods when nobody wants to talk about what they saw for many reasons. They don't want to get stitches, but it's part of a big element in the neighborhood throughout the whole city. Well, there's a lot of money being made on the street. So you're hurting the enterprise on the street alone.
Now let's go to Reed Willis, a Republican, with a question about federal involvement in Chicago. Reed.
So my question for the panelists is whether or not they support President Trump's previous calls for the National Guard to be sent here to Chicago. And if so, what would the National Guard be able to do that local police cannot?
Yeah, President Trump, mentioned the National Guard of Chicago. It's been thrown around before. Thoughts?
Certainly, I believe that anytime we have federal agents, federal law enforcement agents, they're welcome. And certainly, I have nothing against the federal troops, and I'm sure that the president meant that as trying to help the city. I think what we need to do is make sure that politicians realize that they have to spend the money to hire police officers, hire the right police officers, make sure they are trained, have a facility in which to train them, and then also be out there in the community. We've removed our foot officers through most of the city, and we need to put those back.
Are they shutting down detective offices in these difficult neighborhoods, Englewood and so forth? I read that was another concern by the police.
Well, they closed. They have closed some districts and whatnot. That has been the case, but I really couldn't say about the National Guard.
To me, it's like this is a local problem, and for the most part, it has a local solution.
I think it's a bit of a myth, though, to say that there's complete distrust in communities between the police. There really isn't. There's still a lot of people. They call us, they rely on us, they want us to help them. A lot of it is the gangs. Most of the violence is gang violence, and they don't
59 major gangs with a lot of offshoots, 2,400 offshoots of these gangs, and among the most vicious in the country and in the world. Guys, all of you, thank you so much for your input tonight.